Bonjour, ça va? Fabriquien Meccano en français. Sorry, my French isn't good. In fact, I'm not sure if that sounded anything like French. Hi. If you want even more Meccano goodness, why don't you check out my Patreon channel? And please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I post updates in the community section, not only for this week's Patreon build, but also for what I'm currently working on. Thank you, and back to the build. Hi, and welcome back. This week's build is the last of the crane multi-kit builds, and it's a dockyard crane. So this is it. This kit is complete. I've only had the set for 43 years. This crane is of a type that is no longer used to unload ships now. It goes back to the world when ships were unloaded by hand with gangs of workers. What it represents is the heyday of ports, which started to decline in the 1960s and 1970s with the introduction of the shipping container. I've always loved the art of logistics. The ability to get what you want, where you want it, and at just the right moment in time. And it is almost a form of art, or maybe a gigantic puzzle, albeit a linear one. Because if you lose just one part, that's it. The puzzle cannot be completed. And logistics is not just related to work, it is in every aspect of our lives. After all, there is nothing worse than knowing there is a bill due the week before you get paid. And you really want that Meccano related stuff on eBay, but no, you have to pay the bill first. Not that that would relate to me in any way at all. I'm just going to sit in a corner now and sulk. But have you ever thought just how all this stuff gets to us? Because we all consume around 6 tons of imports each year, or 17 kilograms a day in the UK. It is easy to forget that what we need is not guaranteed to be there when we want it. But if 2020 and 2021 have taught us anything, it is how easy those lines are disrupted. From simple things like shipping containers not being returned to the port of origin, so the next load cannot be sent. A lack of drivers for either lorries or trains. To panic buying at the end of the chain, making it almost impossible to keep up with the demand. Each section of the chain has to work perfectly to connect to the next link. Trade has been one of the driving principles for the modernisation of our ports. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Great Britain needed better facilities for importing and exporting goods around the world. And while it is without a doubt the improvements of steam engine technology by the Scottish engineer James Watts that helped fire the Industrial Revolution, it is the work by Jethro Tull in revolutionising agriculture that provided the fuel for that fire. At first, our ports were little better than they had been in the medieval days. Cargo was loaded and unloaded by hand, as ships could only carry a small cargo. Throughout the late medieval period, cargo capacity had increased. But still, as a nation, we didn't import or export large quantities of goods. As the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries came and went, Britain's maritime power base grew, with companies like the East India Company plundering much of the East and Far East resources. Those goods had to be imported into Britain, and the need of ports capable of doing so grew. But still, much of the work was done by hand. It was only in the 19th century, as steam began to power cranes, that shipyard work changed. Level luffing cranes made the loading and unloading of ships easier. Engineering allowed for a method of getting goods out of the ports quicker, Railways helped to ship those goods further afield, and then our main supply routes were fixed. Fresh fish from Grimsby docks could be run into London by L&ER to arrive at the market early in the morning. A catch that 3 hours before had been in the holds of trawlers. To this, the mating of the ports with the railways that helped to make our country what it is. Both goods leaving their outbound journeys to foreign countries and also goods inbound, exotic fruits, would appear in small towns and villages where people had only ever read about them. Fine silks and spices that had been rare were now more commonplace. But like all bubbles, as they expand, that fatal flaw appears and they burst. I think the United Kingdom's single biggest weakness lies in our inability to provide for ourselves, without the need of an outside country's support. Twice in the 20th century, this led to a siege by a foreign power, in the form of a naval blockade. In both cases we managed to weather the siege and fight back. And now, as we enter a third siege, albeit this time by political force, and goods are slowly being strangled as they enter our ports by paperwork post-separation from the EU. And only time will tell to see whether we survive and thrive. I believe we will, after all. Commerce is based on the wish to make money, and already this siege has cost the EU £6.6 billion of lost revenue. In time, the companies will make enough noise as they continue to lose capital. Goods travelling through UK ports are divided into 4 different categories: dry bulk and other general cargo, liquid bulk, ro-ro or roll-on, roll-off, and low-low or lift-on, lift-off. Different ports deal with different goods. Dover and Felixstowe are a good example of 2 neighbouring ports, with Dover handling predominantly ro-ro cargo and some liquid bulk, and Felixstowe dealing with low-low shipments. If you are shipping liquid bulk, then Milford Haven, Southampton, Tees and Forth ports are more likely to unload the cargo for you. But the 31 ports across the UK will handle the cargo and move it onto either the rail or road networks, passing it on to the next part of the puzzle. But now the idea of gangs working dockyards has passed. The Second World War saw the introduction of a new way of shipping goods, the shipping container. This one item has revolutionised the logistic chain, allowing computers to now tell the crane operator where each container is going and when to move it to the road or railhead. London shows a great example of docks and how a city will expand around them. The history of London reveals to us the problems of trade and supply and demand. By the 19th century, London's docks and rivers were in chaos, with a demand not only for more docks, but deeper and wider ones. For a while, the East and West India docks relieved the problems, but that was short-lived. It took the foresight of a group of entrepreneurs, led by George Parker Bidder, to solve the problem. What they saw was the requirement to have docks that were bigger, deeper than any which had been built before. Not just that, but their plan was to reclaim marshland to the east of London to do so. Named the Royal Docks, the first was finished on time in 1855 and named the Victoria Dock. At 13 metres deep, it could handle the ironclad steamships that were unloading at London. These docks were serviced by the latest technologies, including dockside cranes and other services, and more importantly, they could handle more than one of the large ironclads at a time. Followed less than 50 years later in 1880, the Albert Dock was even grander than the Victoria Dock, including such things like railway connection to the dock edge, electricity and refrigerated warehouses. The new technologies allowed for the unloading of goods direct to the rail network and then onto other parts of the nation. Without the docks and the cargoes they brought into the kingdom, it's quite possible that the growth of the nation would not have been as pronounced as it was in the 19th century. The docks also brought employment by the thousands, and that was the Achilles heel. After the Second World War, for a short time, it looked like the docks would continue to thrive. It was an illusion. The containerised cargo that I talked about earlier didn't require the numbers of workforce that had been needed just 20 years before. Also, as ships became bigger to transport the containers in the volumes that was required, the capacity of the royal docks was insufficient to accommodate them. On the 7th of December 1981, the last ship was unloaded and the docks were closed. When people discuss major ports in the United Kingdom, one other port springs to the lips: Liverpool. The Meccano magazine ran an article on the port in January of 1933. The harbour dates back to the Saxon period, over 1,000 years ago, and the settlement on the banks of the river, which was called the Moor Sea. By the Middle Ages, with the silting up of Chester's Harbour on the River Dee, Liverpool, as it was then known, became the major port of trade to Ireland. By 1757, the number of ships using the port was 1,371. In the 19th century, Liverpool was the second largest port in England, vying directly against London. Being a deep-sea port helped in the expansion of the city, but also at a high tax rate. In the 1800s, unrest had become so heated that a royal commission was dispatched to sort the problem out. The commission made great changes to the organisation of the docks and began a long modernisation plan. Liverpool, the home of Meccano, began to boast some of the greatest advancements, with the Gladstone graving dock being the largest dry dock in Europe, costing £7.5 million in the early part of the 20th century. And, at the time of the article, the dock was only 6 years old. The port covered 475 acres with 29 miles of quay, 184 hydraulic cranes, 121 electric cranes and 5 steam cranes, one of which could lift up to 200 tons. The storage accommodation in 1933 was assessed at 200,000 tons. The figures show the number of ships unloading at the port to be 19,363, with a tonnage of over 19 million. By that point, Liverpool was the largest port in the UK for exports, and second only to London for imports. The government's port and domestic waterborne freight statistics for 2020 show Liverpool as now being the UK's 4th largest port, with London reclaiming the title for the first time in over 20 years, handling over 47 million tonnes of cargo. Liverpool handled just over 31 million tonnes. The figures are interesting, as they show a very real effect on trade from COVID, with imports of crude oil falling by 40%, with 78 million tonnes being imported in 2020, down nearly 20 million tonnes due to the restrictions on movement. Gas has remained steady at around 20 million tonnes imported each year. Out of interest, most of our gas is imported from the USA, then Qatar, and finally Russia. Logistics affect all of us on a daily basis. And while many are beyond our control, how we use our personal logistics are not. Money being one. After all, we can only spend it once, before having to earn it again. Boiling the kettle full of water when we only need one mug for that tea break. Overeating, under-exercising, both physically and mentally. Or maybe the one resource that we can never replace via the logistics chain: time. This channel is about all things Meccano. At some point, dinky cars will be making their appearance, having been restored. At this point in time, there is a Trojan van sat on my workbench alongside a midget MG, both part way through being painted. Hornby trains, a box of O-gauge with some non-working engines, are sitting in one of my cupboards. Dinky Builder, a short-lived construction set from which you can make houses. Oh boy, did Lego burst that bubble. And let's not forget the Meccano jigsaw puzzle cutter, even though I can't see many videos about that happening. But also Chemex, or the Meccano chemical experiment set from the 1930s. And I cannot discuss any of these with my father. The history of engineering he would have loved. The restoration of broken toys would have really appealed to him. But as a chemist, he would have been thrilled at the thought of videoing the chemical experiments of his youth. Probably, he would have been amazed at the ease at which the chemicals are still available. Apart from the explosives. Sorry, MI5. Honest, the search history is for a YouTube channel and not for something much more sinister. But that resource is gone. I can't just pop out to the supermarket and buy a packet of time off the shelf. I wish I could. I wish I could tell him that me, the offspring, who never did chemistry at school because I was told it was too thick, too stupid to understand it by my teachers, is reading and studying a collection of 1930s experiments. I wish I could tell him that at last I have built every crane in this set. This Christmas present from 44 years ago. That would have made him laugh, both with me and at himself, as he was notorious for not opening presents.